Mark adjusted his grip on the coffee tray as he stepped out of the elevator onto the 15th floor of Lauren's office building. The familiar scent of roasted espresso mixed with the faint aroma of printer ink and high-end perfume that clung to the workspace. He smiled to himself, imagining the surprise on Lauren's face when he handed her the caramel macchiato she loved so much. It wasn't often that he got to do things like this, small romantic gestures that reminded them of the early days of their marriage. Lately, work had kept them both busy, and he missed the little moments, the spontaneous affection. So when he found himself with a free afternoon, he didn't hesitate. A simple coffee run, a kiss, maybe a few minutes stolen from her busy schedule. As he rounded the corner toward her office, he noticed that her assistant wasn't at her desk. Odd, Lauren had mentioned a packed schedule today, which meant her assistant should have been glued to that chair. Shrugging it off, Mark pushed the door open, eager to see the surprise light up her face. Instead, he froze. The scene before him burned into his mind with the clarity of a nightmare he would never wake up from. Lauren sat perched on the edge of her desk, her silk blouse unbuttoned just enough to reveal the lace of her bra. Between her legs stood a man, tall, well-dressed, confident. His hands rested possessively on her thighs, his lips tracing a slow path down her neck. Mark's heartbeat slammed against his ribcage, his breath catching in his throat. The coffee tray in his hands trembled slightly. His instincts screamed at him to react, to yell, to demand answers, to lash out. But instead, he did something that surprised even himself. He stayed silent. With a calmness that felt almost surreal, he took a slow step back, retreating into the hallway before they even noticed him. The door clicked softly shut, leaving him standing there, gripping the now pointless coffee cups. His mind raced. 1,000 emotions threatened to consume him. Rage, betrayal, heartbreak, but above all, one thought crystallized in his mind, clear and cold as ice. This wasn't going to end with an emotional outburst. No, Lauren wouldn't get away with this. She had no idea the storm that was coming for her, and Mark intended to make sure she never forgot it. Mark walked to his car in a daze, gripping the untouched coffee cup so tightly that the lids buckled under the pressure. The world around him blurred, just the hum of city life, the passing chatter of pedestrians, the distant honk of a car horn. None of it registered. The only thing in focus was the image of Lauren, her body pressed against another man, his hands roaming her so intimately, so carelessly. A lesser man would have stormed into that office, flipping desks, shouting obscenities, demanding answers. But Mark wasn't a lesser man. He was patient, calculated. He knew that reacting on impulse would only give Lauren control, allow her to spin the narrative in her favor. So he did nothing. Not yet. Sliding into his car, he placed the coffee cups onto the passenger seat with deliberate care, as if they still served a purpose. His fingers clenched against the steering wheel, his mind working at breakneck speed. He needed proof, undeniable, irrefutable evidence. That meant patience. That meant strategy. Lauren had always prided herself on her ability to manipulate a situation, to keep things just under the radar, to play the perfect wife while indulging in her own selfish desires. She believed she was untouchable, that no one would ever suspect, that he would never suspect. Mark chuckled darkly. Oh, how wrong she was. That night, he played his part to perfection. He walked through the front door of their home and kissed Lauren on the cheek just like any other evening. She smiled at him, the same smile she had likely flashed at him earlier that day, and yet there wasn't a trace of guilt in her eyes. She was good. But he would be better. Busy day? He asked casually, watching her closely as she took a sip of wine. Exhausting, she sighed, shaking her head. Meetings all day, you know how it is. Lies, so effortlessly spoken. Mark simply nodded, feigning exhaustion of his own. But as she continued her charade, his mind was already moving forward. Tomorrow, he would begin his work. A private investigator, phone records, bank statements, hotel receipts. By the time he was finished, Lauren wouldn't just be exposed, she would be ruined. The next morning, Mark rose before Lauren, moving silently through the house as if nothing had changed. The coffee machine hummed, filling the kitchen with the familiar scent of morning routine. But there was nothing routine about today. Today marked the beginning of his plan. Lauren stirred in bed, stretching with a soft sigh as sunlight peeked through the curtains. Mark watched her from the doorway, studying the ease with which she moved, the way she smiled sleepily as she caught sight of him. It sickened him. How effortlessly she could pretend. "Morning," she murmured, running a hand through her tousled hair. "You're up early." "Big day at work," Mark replied smoothly, hiding the weight of his true thoughts beneath an easy smile. "Thought I'd get a head start." She nodded, seemingly satisfied, and pulled the blanket tighter around her. "I might work late tonight. We're finalizing that new campaign. You know how it is." He knew exactly how it was. "Of course," he said, leaning in to brush a kiss against her forehead. "Don't work too hard." Inside, he burned with the irony of it all. Phase 1, gather proof. By the time Lauren left for work, Mark was already making calls. His first was to a private investigator, a former law enforcement officer who had seen enough betrayals to recognize the telltale signs immediately. Within the hour, he had a plan in place. Lauren's movements would be tracked, her calls recorded, her indiscretions laid bare. Next, Mark turned to financials. Years in business had taught him the importance of control, of ensuring there were no loose ends when things fell apart. He combed through their joint accounts, pinpointing unusual withdrawals, unexplained expenses, reservations that didn't line up with the stories Lauren had fed him. The pieces were falling into place. Phase 2, play the game. When Lauren returned home that evening, Mark made sure everything appeared normal. He greeted her with a warm smile, poured her a glass of wine, and listened attentively as she recounted her busy day. She had no idea he already knew she had left work 2 hours early, that she had spent the afternoon in a hotel room with him. "How was your day?" she asked, swirling her wine. Same old," Mark replied. "Nothing out of the ordinary. Lies, so easy, so effortless." The irony was almost poetic. Lauren stretched, yawning. "I think I'll turn in early. It's been exhausting." "I bet it has," Mark murmured under his breath as she disappeared down the hall. Later that night, his phone buzzed. A message from the investigator. "You were right. She's been seeing him for months. Photos, timestamps, receipts. It's all here." Mark exhaled slowly, staring at the message. His hands curled into fists. She thought she had gotten away with it, but she had only just begun to lose everything. Mark sat in his home office, staring at the folder the investigator had sent over. Every page, every photo, every timestamp was a dagger to the heart, but he didn't flinch. He forced himself to absorb every detail. Lauren had been seeing Daniel for months, meeting in hotels, slipping away during work hours, using cash to cover her tracks. But she wasn't as careful as she thought. One receipt showed a charge to their joint credit card, careless. Another photo caught Daniel's car parked outside their house while Mark had been away on a business trip, disrespectful. And then there was the email. An intimate message between them left open on Lauren's work laptop, as if she believed no one would ever find it. She truly thought she was untouchable. Mark inhaled deeply, pushing the pain aside. He had no time for sorrow. There was only action now. Phase 3, set the stage. With every move, Mark made sure Lauren remained oblivious. He continued acting the devoted husband, attentive, affectionate, never once hinting that he knew. If she sensed anything, she might start covering her tracks, or worse, try to manipulate him into forgiving her before he had the chance to strike. He wasn't going to give her that option. Instead, he planned the perfect trap. A fake business proposal, a conference room full of her colleagues, including her boss, a PowerPoint presentation she would never forget. The pieces were falling into place. The night before the confrontation, Mark watched Lauren sleep, her breathing slow and steady. He wondered if she ever felt guilty, if she ever looked at him and questioned what she was doing. But as she lay there, peaceful and unaware, he knew the answer. She never loved him the way he loved her. The next morning, as she kissed him goodbye and walked out the door, Mark smiled. "Have a great day, babe," he said. She smiled back, none the wiser, but this was the last time she would ever walk into that office with her head held high. Tomorrow, everything she had built, the lies, the deception, the double life, would come crashing down, and Mark would be the one to pull the rug out from under her. The conference room buzzed with conversation as Lauren stepped inside, oblivious to the storm waiting for her. She smoothed her blouse, exuding the confidence of a woman who believed she had everything under control. Mark stood at the front of the room, his expression unreadable. A projector was set up behind him, a thick folder resting on the long glass table. Several of her colleagues, including her boss, were already seated, waiting for what they believed was an important business proposal. "Mark?" Lauren's voice carried a note of confusion as she approached him. "What's going on?" He gave her a small, almost reassuring smile. "I just wanted to make sure everyone's on the same page before we move forward. She blinked, glancing at the faces around the table. Something felt off, but she couldn't quite place it. Mark turned to the screen, clicking a button on his remote. The first image appeared. Lauren froze. It was a photo, her and Daniel in the parking lot of the Evergreen Hotel. The timestamp was clear. The next slide showed them entering a room. The next, a close-up of their entwined hands across a restaurant table. The silence in the room became suffocating. Her boss shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his gaze flicking between the screen and Lauren. Lauren, what is this? Mark didn't need to say anything. He let the evidence speak for itself. Emails, receipts, more damning photos, a full, undeniable timeline of her affair. Lauren's face drained of color, her mouth opened and closed, but no words came. Then, Daniel's name was mentioned by her boss, who looked absolutely livid. You do realize this company has a zero-tolerance policy for workplace affairs, right? That's when she finally snapped. Mark, please, she whispered, her voice trembling. Let's talk about this in private. Mark's eyes hardened. Private? Like the way you handled our marriage? He leaned forward, lowering his voice so only she could hear. You thought you were playing me, Lauren, but the truth is, I've been playing you this whole time. Tears welled in her eyes as the weight of the situation crushed her. Her reputation destroyed. Her career over. Mark straightened, nodding toward the stunned room. I think that's all the information we need. And with that, he turned and walked out, leaving Lauren to deal with the wreckage of her own making.